signed off by the person, the staff person who verified, and the others, they actually kept the documents. And there was some confusion this year about whether or not the documents had to be kept in every file. What we did have was, though, a verification that they had been checked and what was checked. And what we've done for next year is to be clear about that. That was the problem that we had, and when we brought the auditors back, I think they were satisfied that we did indeed have a process in place and that we could verify it. The problem we had is what we kept in the permanent records. And next year that will not be an issue. As it relates to what happens in charter schools, we did not have that same process for charter schools. There was a separate process.
Why was that? Why was that, Ms. Ackerman? That's not in your best interest.
Well, I know, but we have no...
That is public school money, per pupil public school money that goes to the charter schools. So why wouldn't you insist that they, in fact, use the very same process that you have forced on the public schools that are non-charter schools?
Well, I'd like to insist that they do, but I don't think that I...
And that will happen. I mean, we've noticed that that's been a problem. With the escalating number of children that are accessing public charter schools, there has to be some continuity in the enrollment and making sure that the residency includes DC residents. So, in fact, Ms. Newman and I have been talking about the best way to do it. If it needs to be done legislatively, it will be. If it needs to be done in rulemaking, we will make that happen.
Very much appreciate that, to clear this problem up once and for all. Could I ask you a question? And by the way, I'm sure you'd be concerned about that, Mr. Chavis, because some of they're no longer saying 80,000 students. So that means 4,000 disappeared just by counting. Now they're saying 75,000. You know what's happened to 7 and 8.
Yes.
And that's where the children were. And that's also where much of the movement has gone from. So that's why it's been hard for us to believe that somehow the movement out of the city has been so colossal, but the school system remained exactly where it was. And there's some credibility restored because at least the number has gone down so that we can see that there's accurate counting. Let me ask you about, in light of that, about this difficult problem the school system has had. And one, I want to know if there is a continuing decline in student population and whether you anticipate that that will be the case. I mean, we're gaining population, but all the indications are that they are, single people and married couples without children. So one, in your long-range planning, do you see a decline in the student population? And two, what has happened to the properties that were to be sold once you close the school? If there's a decline in student population, do you see any more consolidation or closing of schools?
Well, let me answer the first one. I think Ms. Newman can talk about the surplus properties. The control board's been tasked with that responsibility. We're going through this process of implementing a long-range master facilities plan, and one of the reasons why we rejected the plan last year is it did not deal with the demographic trends. And we don't want to talk about, we're talking about building or modernizing new schools. We don't want to build schools or modernize schools where there aren't going to be children. And so we are doing some statistical analysis to try to decide where the growths are in this city. It is true that the city is continuing to lose population, but it is also true that that is being stabilized somewhat, and it is being offset to some degree, not the degree we'd like, by new folks coming into the city. My ward, as you mentioned, Ward 7, has lost more people in this city than any ward in the city over the past 10 years. But we do see home sales increasing by families, even in my ward. So the short answer to your question is, yes, we think that the school population is still declining, but we don't feel it's declining at the same rate. I think the renaissance in the city will be reflected in middle-class families coming back in. I think that with some of the inroads we're making with public safety and even along the tax lines, I think that's going to have frankly, a heartening impact on that issue. But I think Ms. Newman can speak specifically about surplus property.
Yes, I can, and I can't speak in a way that I'm very proud of. I think that most of us who've been involved with the disposition of the school property up until about 2 months ago have not been that comfortable that the process has run as smoothly as it should run. But what I think we all are in agreement on right now is that we need to see which of the schools are in process and where are there certain expectations that there is property to be disposed of. And then what we need to do is to revisit the policy and determine. What I started to get along the way was more public sentiment that the school system not sell the properties, but rather lease it. Well, that wasn't the policy at the outset. So what I'm suggesting is that once we see what's in process and we take care of those up or down, that then we, through the public process of the council, revisit what is and should be the policy. How much should there be a determination of the community impact and other community uses, and how much should only the bottom line be considered in the disposition of the property?
I can understand your concern, and of course, you are getting competing notions here. One thing you don't want to have happen to you is what happened to the city in the past. The city has closed schools, and these schools have become terrible wrecks in communities. So if you close the schools, went through all that pain, then some disposition must be made of the school. Either the school, as you say, there are options. If you don't want to sell it, or you decide, on second thought you shouldn't sell it, then the only thing I'm asking is don't let happen what has happened in my neighborhood, where the school site became the focus for all of the dereliction in the neighborhood. It was the public school site. Whereas people were taking care of their homes, it was the public school site, because the public schools closed the site years ago and nothing ever happened to it. So the public thinks that having gone through this terrible pain and turmoil, which of course was necessary to close the schools, that the site is going to be taken care of. I would only ask that a time limit be put on it. For example, to say that by the end of this year, a decision will be made on what is the disposition of the closed schools, so that we will not go into the year 2000 not even knowing whether it's going to be sold or whether you've made another decision.
The gentlelady yield, I would concur
Absolutely.
with that. I would concur with that.
Mr. Chairman, a point of personal privilege. Mr. Singleton is a member of the elected school board, and I think he feels that I haven't properly represented the optimism and the support for the elected school board, and I would like to ask, could he have a minute?
He's not. He isn't sworn. And we invited the school board to participate, and their leader did not show or notify us she wasn't showing.
I
We will
see.
give an ample opportunity at another hearing.
I see. All
Okay.
right.
Thank you, Ms. Chairman. No more,
All right, thank
no
you,
more
Mr. Horn.
questions.
Mr. Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think earlier, in response to a question from the panel, Superintendent, you mentioned the open enrollment policy of the district. Do you have data on last fall's results of open enrollment, and has it been analyzed as to where a particular student was and where that student is now going? And is that data available, and have you analyzed it in terms of, is this a bad school that student was leaving from to go to what was perceived by parents and perhaps the child as a good school? And what can you tell me about the analysis of that data?
Again, we are in the process. This is the first year that we've put out our school profile, so we're looking at a variety of data, including where our students attend schools. We'll be able to, for the first time, take a look at that as we look at all the data we've compiled by school. There is movement across the district, and we can see within each school how many students are out of boundary. So we can now, we'll be able to look at how many students are out of boundary and continue, how many students migrate back. But in the past, again, we haven't kept that, we haven't looked at that data, but we now are compiling it in the new school profiles along with other data that will allow us to look at it and strategically plan, but to let parents look at.
Well, that's where I was
Schools.
leading. Have you thought of a random sample of the parents when you see some significant sort of more than normal change? Either a person might have bought a house in a different type of neighborhood or not. But the question is, if they're still living at a certain address and changing schools, that ought to be perhaps significant. And are you thinking of doing a survey to get more information?
We, this is the second year that we surveyed all of our parents, and there are a variety of questions. Many of them relate to the school and what's happening in the school. And since this is our second year, we can now begin to compare what parents said last year with the data that we have this year when we get it back. In fact, the surveys are in probably in all of our homes this week, or they will be by the end of this week, and we're expecting them back, and we're going to do the comparison. We're going to use it. I'm a firm believer that data needs to drive the decisions in the district, and these surveys tell us a lot. They told us a lot last year, and they'll tell us even more about the progress that we're making in our individual schools. We also surveyed our students and staff.
I suspect you and I could agree that the principal sort of sets the tone for the school and makes the difference. My children went to the D.C. schools when they were desegregated, two-thirds black in the particular junior high my daughter went to. Superb education. Then the principal retired after many years, and the school started going downhill because the successor never left the principal's office.
Right.
The previous principal was out there in those halls, was tooting his whistle, knew students by name, all the things that connect in terms of encouraging students to get an education. So
Well,
I'd hope you'd be looking at that and maybe hold some principals accountable.
Well, last year we changed 39 principals. I do believe that the victory is in the classroom with the teacher, but it's facilitated in the principal's office. If you want to see a good school, there's a good principal in the principal's office.
Well, and as you know, that also means the principal ought to be backing up the teacher when there's
Absolutely.
discipline problems, and too often principals have been just hiding behind the desk. I don't know how you find that as a superintendent, whether they're hiding under the desk or just behind the desk, but I leave that up to your professionalism. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Horn, thank you, and I want to thank all of you. We may submit some further questions, and Ms. Atkins, I know you're going to get back to us with those test scores that we asked, and we'll make those part of the record.
Yes.
Without objection, all written statements submitted by the witnesses will be made part of the permanent record, and the record will remain open for 10 days. The subcommittee will continue to work with all interested parties to achieve these objectives of making this a great school system, and these proceedings are closed. Good. All right. We're moving in the right direction. That's why we have these hearings and everything else.